Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Milan. I'm part of the church here on the leadership team. During the week, I'm the math department supervisor at Hempfield School District and excited to wrap up our family series here this morning with you. Teaching trigonometry class, you just never know what students are going to say. I asked the kids, what's the sine of 40? The guy in the front says, it's saying things like, when I was your age. So I know it's hard to integrate math humor into a sermon, but I thought I'd give it a shot. So math is like family. It's a simple idea, but it can get complicated. And we're going to talk a little bit about some complicated family issues this morning. When I think about memories, I think about snapshots and pictures that capture different memories. My son Andrew has crossed paths with a few of my former students, and he asked them, what was Mr. Milan's math class like? And the students that he encountered all said the same story. And one of my lessons was on like fractions or something, but when I'm teaching that lesson, I bring in a griddle, have it all hot, and some pancake batter, and I make pancakes for the students while I'm teaching this math lesson. And I put a lot of time and effort into these math lessons and try and connect them to something interesting, something memorable. And the students have universally told Andrew that the thing they remember about math class is eating pancakes. So sometimes they remember the right stuff, sometimes they just remember something that stood out to them and was fun. I think back on my growing up years, things that stand out to me over the years. There are a lot of things that happen. But I remember one day going out to, we had a detached garage, and my dad was out working, and he had his toolbox out right in front of the garage. And I basically raised the garage door, stepped over my dad's toolbox that was sitting right in front of the car that I was about to pull out of the garage, and pulled out of the garage, drove right over my dad's toolbox. While he was standing there watching, the whole thing happen. And it's memories like that stand out, because how we respond, how we react to life really leaves an impression on people. And just shout out to my dad for how he responded in that moment. While I'm sure he was super frustrated over the experience, he extended grace to me in that experience. And, I certainly appreciated that. Sometimes it's little things in how we react. Sometimes there's big events that have a big impact on our lives. And I'd like to share something that had a big impact on my extended family. I brought a picture of my extended family. This is from the 80s. You can probably tell from some of the hairstyles. An extra credit if you can pick me out of that picture, but I'm in there somewhere. But this is my cousins and aunts and uncles on my mom's side of the family. And there's something that happened in that family. You have to wind the clock back about 70 years. Most of the people in that picture weren't born yet, including me. In fact, my mom was only 9 months old when this event happened. But my grandparents were Wilmer and Helen Thomas. And my grandfather was a butcher. He was a businessman. And I guess not a very good businessman or butcher. He wasn't very good with finances, and he got into financial trouble. And he went to some of his close personal friends and asked for personal loans to fund the business just for the short term, to buy a steer or whatever he was butchering until he could get to market and pay them back next week. And eventually, he got in a situation that he couldn't deal with or didn't deal with. And he drove his car away from the family. He left a suicide note and didn't commit suicide, but he didn't come back ever. And he left. My mom was nine months old. Her oldest brother was about 10. So he left a single mom and a family of 4. He left Lancaster County. He left Pennsylvania, started a new life out in Chicago, and never returned. And I think about the challenge of that for everyone involved. I think about my grandma, who started life as a single mom with a knock on the door from a friend asking for repayment of a loan that she didn't even know about, had no way to repay the money the friend couldn't afford to lose. And just the challenge of dealing with all of that. I think about my Uncle Wilmer, who was 10 years old, and my son Kyle's about 12 years old. Think about the hole that it leaves when your dad just walks out of your life, never to return, and trying to sort through that as kids, trying to figure out what it all means and why it happened. And I want to honor my grandmother for the steps that she took. Helen Thomas was a strong woman, and as a single mom in the late 1940s, it was pretty rare in the Mennonite circles, Lancaster County, to be a single mom. And she worked hard, she saved, she did what she could to provide great experiences for her kids. And when I see this whole picture and the relationships that I have with my cousins and with my aunts and uncles, I think about the decisions that my grandmother made through those years to create a great experience for everybody involved. And she would describe, the words that she would use to describe the situation, she would say that Daddy missed out by leaving. That was how she captured the experience. That Daddy missed out on the family dinners. He missed out on the birthdays and birthday parties. He missed out on the Christmas mornings, on teaching his kids to drive, on graduations, walking his daughters down the aisle. He missed out on all the good stuff. And I knew my grandmother well, was at her house often, and she lived a long life and had lots of great experiences. My grandfather, I never knew. He died the year that I was born. And it's true that he missed out. But it was the wisdom of my grandmother to rewrite the script, to frame that for her children and for her grandchildren, and to make a great family experience for all of us. Sometimes it's big things and how we respond to big things in life, and sometimes it's little things. I want to share a quick story about somebody else in this picture. My Aunt Ruth, this was a story from when I was about 12 years old. I was at my grandmother's house, and I got in a football for Christmas. And it was a cold December day, and I was pretty excited to go out and throw football, and I had lots of cousins, as you can tell. And you would figure at least one of them would want to throw football, but none of them did, and it was probably because I was annoying or, whatever's going on. But my aunt took notice of this, and she said, I'll go out and throw football with you. And so even for just a few minutes, we went outside, threw the football back and forth. And as I've reflected on that over the years, I often think, she expressed willingness to go out and throw football with me, but you can bet if someone sat down and asked her, do you really want to go out in the cold right now and throw football? That probably wasn't on the top of her list. But she set aside what she wanted to do, did something for me, and I've always appreciated that. And I often think, how can I make those kind of decisions for the people around me? How can I do that for my own children? How can I do that for my students at school or for the kids that I coach? And it leaves an impression on me, like a snapshot that I refer back to. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk about how we leave a legacy, how we do things, what decisions can we make that are going to impact our nieces and nephews or the people that come after us. What stories are going to be told about us? And so I'd like to take a few minutes and track through one of the most famous families in the Bible. And we're in a family series, and one thing that we don't do when we go to the Bible, we don't go to the Bible to find the perfect families and try to model our lives after theirs. Because if you start paging through those first couple chapters in Genesis, you'll see that there were train wreck families in the Bible. And we're going to see one of those train wrecks here this morning and how different people responded to difficult situations. And that's really what we're about here. We talk about how do we respond? What has God called us to do? If we're going to be followers of Jesus, how do we respond to the difficult situations that we're presented with? So that's what we're going to look at this morning. So we start with Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob had a favorite wife and a favorite child. And there's probably a whole other sermon involved just in that statement. But his favorite wife was Rachel. His favorite child was Joseph. And back in those days, Joseph was the 11th son. He was the 11th oldest, right? And in ancient times, being the oldest child was a big deal. Being the 11th oldest, not so much, right? So Joseph was pretty full of himself. He was favored by his father. We know about his special coat and all of that stuff. And he was about 17 years old, and his father put him in a position of honor and prestige. His father would send him out to check up on his older brothers. And I bet his brothers were always really excited for Joseph to come and report back to his dad on all the bad things that they were doing. And we see that one time Joseph sent out to his brothers. A lot of these details are probably familiar to you. But Joseph was approaching, and his brothers are trying to figure out, how do we just get rid of this guy? And they're arguing about what they're going to do. They settle on, well, let's just kill him. And then eventually they decide, well, let's not kill him. Nobody wins in that, right? Why don't we just sell him as a slave to the passing caravan? And so I think about that day from Joseph's perspective, right? When he woke up that morning, what was he used to? He was used to soft beds, warm blankets. He was used to late mornings, drinking lemonade in the shade. He was used to being important. He was used to rich food, servants, lots of great things from being the favorite son of a wealthy family. And on that day, everything changed. He went from that experience to being a slave. And Joseph knew, even before he experienced any of it, what the life of a slave was like. And he knew that it was sunburn and blisters and short nights and early mornings, back-breaking work, no pity, no sympathy, no family. And that was going to be his experience for the rest of his life, because Joseph knew what some of us might not have thought about. In ancient times, it was very difficult to commit suicide. And so slaves were locked in their misery. And that's what Joseph was sold into by his own brothers. So we wind forward a little bit. We see Joseph makes his way to Egypt, right? And he's working his way through this terrible situation, and it looks like he's landed on his feet. He's in the house of a very wealthy man, Potiphar, and he's worked his way up through the slave ranks. So not quite the experience he was hoping for back when he was back with his dad, but he's doing all right. He's put in charge of stuff. He's administrating the house. And then maybe his master's away for a couple weeks or whatever it is. He was a military man. And his master's wife starts taking an interest in this handsome young slave boy. And he starts holding her off, rejecting her advances, and she doesn't take so kindly to that either, and accuses him of going after her. And you can read into between the lines a little bit that his master must have realized this was a sham accusation, because normally in those kind of situations, a slave would have just been executed. But his master sends Joseph off to prison. And it's hard to imagine something falling from a higher high to a lower low than what Joseph has experienced over these years. Because when you land as a slave in a prison in Egypt, you're not waiting for your court-appointed lawyer. You're not waiting for a trial by a jury of your peers. In fact, you're not waiting for anything. You're just there forever. And it's interesting that the narrator jumps in and says, when Joseph was in prison, says, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And that always stands out to me as like, I don't know, really? Like, is that what it's like to experience the favor of the Lord? That you have favor with the prison warden? I mean, all of this has been totally unfair in Joseph's experience. He's been falsely accused. He's been sold by his brothers. And Joseph's in the prison for years and years. In fact, he has an experience where he thinks like maybe he's getting out soon. He has an experience with dreams with one of his cellmates, and something happens. He thinks, this guy's going back to Pharaoh's house, and I'm going to be out of here soon. But then it's years and years after that still. And eventually, Pharaoh has a dream, kind of a weird dream, fat cows, skinny cows, whatever. He's tormented by this dream. And the guy whose dream Joseph interpreted says, hey, I know a guy in prison that can interpret this dream. He did for me. And so Joseph's cleaned up, right? Give him a new outfit. And he heads to Pharaoh's house. And over the course of these years and years, from the time Joseph was sold as a slave to now he's standing in Pharaoh's house, and on that day, Pharaoh elevates Joseph to the second in command, one of the greatest nations in the world. And so we'd see Joseph's rise to prestige and power. And he administrates for the Pharaoh. through the fat years, through the years of plenty, and then through the lean years, and all kinds of good things in this season of Joseph's life. And then we get to the critical moment. The reason why we know any of this story is really what happened next. So Joseph's brothers, they're off in faraway land, and the famine strikes there. And so their whole clan is starving to death, and they hear there's grain in Egypt, and they come to Egypt. And again, a lot of this story might be familiar to you, but we see his brothers, 10 brothers coming to see Joseph, and they all bow down before him. They don't know it's Joseph. And Joseph has a decision to make, a critical moment in his life, right? And in that moment, I wonder what was running through Joseph's mind. I wonder if he was thinking about the clink of the coins on the day that his brothers sold him into slavery, thinking about their laughs of derision at his humiliation and terror. And Joseph had to make a decision about whether to forgive and reconcile. And I always thought, where did his ability to make that decision come from? And obviously it comes from the grace of God. But there's one thing that I think we can see in Joseph's history and the story of his family that I had never connected before, and I want to share that with you this morning. So we're going to push pause on that story and rewind the clock a couple decades. Said it was Abraham and his son Isaac. Isaac had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. And actually, Esau was the older of the 2 sons. Jacob was Joseph's father, and there was always tension between Jacob and Esau. Esau was the oldest, so he would have been in line for all of the double portion of the inheritance and all of that good stuff. And Jacob was always trying to figure out how to swindle him out of the stuff that Jacob wanted for himself. And there's a couple stories where they trade a bowl of soup for the birthright. And then we see at the end of Isaac's life, Isaac, his favorite son is Esau, and he's going to bless Esau, and Jacob tricks Esau out of that blessing. And so Jacob is always trying to connive and figure out how he can get what he wants from Esau. And Jacob got wind that Esau was, as soon as Isaac died, as soon as their father died, Esau was going to kill Jacob and fix all of these things that Jacob had stolen from him. So Jacob took off. He left the clan. He went to a faraway land. And for 20 years, Jacob built up his own clan, his own family. That's the deal with the 4 wives and 12 kids and all of that stuff. But while he was in that faraway land, building up his family, his clan, God came and spoke to Jacob. And he said, I want you to return to your brother Esau. I want you to return home. And you can imagine what discussions happened. Like, why would we do that? Like, life's pretty good over here. Why are we going home? But Jacob responded to God's call to return home. And so Jacob gathers up all his wives, all his kids, all of his livestock and shepherds and servants and everybody that he had. And they make the trek back home. And Esau gets wind that Jacob is on his way home. And the Bible says that Esau gathered a group of 400 men. So you picture a group of 400, an army basically, of 400 men advancing out to Jacob, and Jacob's big clan of shepherds and wives and kids advancing to Esau. And there's a lot of tension in the air. And it says that Jacob took his favorite wife, Rachel, and Joseph, and put them in the back. And Jacob went in the front. And it says that Jacob bowed down before Esau. So as he saw Esau approaching, and as they were approaching Esau, Jacob bowed down. And Joseph would have been able to see this. Joseph and Rachel would have been able to see this from the back of the clan. And every couple steps, Jacob would take a couple more steps toward Esau and then bow down, and a couple more steps and bow down. And Esau had a decision to make. And we hear that Esau ran to Jacob, and they embraced, and Esau offered forgiveness and reconciliation, restored the family to one unit. And I think about Joseph as a young boy. Like, maybe he understood what was going on, maybe he didn't. But that would have been a story that was retold, probably regularly. That Uncle Esau, remember the day when Uncle Esau welcomed us all home? Remember the day when Uncle Esau extended forgiveness? When he offered grace and acceptance of our Father? And so now you scroll ahead 30 years, And Joseph is in that same position. And it makes me wonder, did Joseph think about Uncle Esau when he had to make that decision? And it makes me wonder the decisions that we have to make. How often are we in the position of Uncle Esau? And we have to make a decision about extending grace and forgiveness. And we know how the story ended with Joseph, and if he hadn't made that decision, we probably wouldn't even know about the story. But I think about what's the application for us. And so I think as you walked in, you grabbed one of these black stones. And if you just grab that right now, the reason why I asked you to have a black stone is because we all go through hard things. We all experience pain and hardship, maybe an injustice, hopefully not as seriously as the injustice that Joseph experienced, but we all experience things where we're treated poorly, where we go through something and it's just unfair. It shouldn't have happened that way. He shouldn't have left. He shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have had to walk through this difficult season. It's just unfair. Or maybe on the other side of that, we're the ones that created the pain, created the hardship, did the thing that we now regret. But to me, this stone represents that kind of situation. And if nothing comes to mind for you, the stone doesn't really represent anything, then when we're done here this morning, you could just leave it on your seat and we'll come pick it up. But if this stone, if it's pretty easy for you to think about what this would represent in your life, then I'm going to encourage you to make a choice between two options for what to do with this stone. Before we get to those two options, I asked Dale Peters to come and share a little bit of his story. So he's going to come to the front. And Dale is in the construction field, a carpenter. He does amazing work. In fact, if you look at the woodwork that's here in the auditorium, that's some of his handiwork. And Dale went through a season as a businessman where some unfair things happened to him. And anytime you're in construction and got a lot of people working for you, got big projects going, there's change orders, and there's a lot of trust between someone in a position like that and the person you're working for. And so he's going to share a little bit about that story and how it affected him, and then some of the choices that he had to make and how he responded.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning. So I'm going to take you back approximately 10 years to a time when, like Mike said, sometimes in construction things can get a little crazy with contract law and all that. And I ran into a project that ended up in a dispute, great financial loss. It ended up in a lawsuit. And just to give you a little backstory about me, I was married in 1984 to my wife, Joette. We had a child in 85. We started business in 85, had another daughter a few years later. And I was doing what I loved. I was living the life. I was living the dream. Loved everything about what I did. And all of a sudden, I come to this really, really hard place that I had no idea how to navigate. So this ended up causing great loss. I ended up laying off employees, having to restructure, and basically start over. And I found myself in the next few years having this tremendous hate. And hate's a strong word, but I had this tremendous hate toward this client because he changed everything I knew. And that hate was that black rock Mike's talking about. And I carried it with me. And it got to the point where it was going to be all-consuming. I had to deal with it. How do you deal with it? I felt I was wronged. And I happened to be working a project close to this original one. And I'd drive by every day, and it would stir up this emotion. And finally, I decided, I need to deal with this. I need to have a conversation with this client because there was never an ending. And I knew I couldn't go on hating. But yet, part of me says, I didn't cause it. I didn't do this. Why do I need to have a conversation? So one day, I decided this is the day. I'm going to stop in. I'm going to have a conversation. I wasn't sure what I would say, how it would work. I didn't know how it would be received. But I stopped, I knocked on the door, and the wife came to the door. I think she was quite shocked to see me there. And I asked if the husband was home, and she said, no, he's not home. And I said, well, I just wanted to stop and talk to you. She said, well, I prefer that you talk to my husband. I said, okay, I can do that. She gave me his phone number. But I said, before I leave, I want to share with you why I came. I said, I know we'll never, ever agree on what happened. But I said, I do realize that from your viewpoint, I didn't measure up to your expectations. And for that, I said, I ask your forgiveness. And I said, I want you to know I also forgive for the hurt and pain you caused in my life. And I wish you the best and want to move forward. And she said, I don't know what to say. I said, you don't need to say anything. She's like, please call my husband. So I left there, and I'm thinking, kind of like, great, God, I thought I was going to do this and get this done. Now I'm halfway. Drove to my job, decided to make the phone call, and had a conversation with the husband, told him the same thing. I said, you know, I realized that we never had closure. I realized in your eyesight, I didn't measure up. I asked you forgiveness, and I offer my forgiveness also. And then we chatted for a while, and he wished me the best, and I likewise, and I hung up that phone, and my heart was healed. It was amazing. And I knew that if I ever run into this individual, I can have a conversation with him. We can be good with one another. We might not be best friends, but it healed the hurt. And some of the thoughts I have through that process was, you know, you have these things in your life, and you just go back and you say, well, why me? I didn't cause it. You know, they hurt me. And then you have to think about Jesus dying on the cross for something he didn't do. And he took all our sins and did that for us. And that's love. And you can't love with hate in your heart. And I'm just so thankful for that experience, even though I don't want to live it again. It's just been a blessing.
So thank you for sharing that, Dale. So we're going to take the couple minutes that remain this morning, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on your own life story, your own situation. And Calvin's going to come out and play a little bit while we reflect and connect with God about this. But if you're thinking about an actual situation with somebody, maybe something like what Dale went through, or whatever it could be, hurt or unforgiveness, or anything that you're looking to see forgiveness on, or healing, or just move on with, whatever this stone would represent, you really have two options for what to do with it. Like, you walked in the door with that hurt, with that pain, with that situation, and you can put the stone in your pocket and you can walk back out the door. We brought the cross in this morning, and I would encourage you or invite you to bring that stone up. And we have two little baskets at the bottom of the cross, and you can drop this stone in there. And then my hope is that what that would signify is that you're ready to stop carrying the rock. You're ready to make a change. You're ready to turn it over to God and seek the beginning of that reconciliation. Typically in these situations, like Dale described, it's one thing to come to the point where you're ready to drop the rock, but there's usually some kind of next step. And I put some cards up on the cross. You can pick one of those up if you want. But it just says to do on the top. And so maybe that means there's a phone call that you have to make. Maybe there's a breakfast that you got to schedule, or a dinner invitation that you need to send out. But I would just ask that you would consider taking an action step, even this week, maybe even today, to reach out to the person where that hurt is and to start rebuilding that relationship, kind of the way Esau did, kind of the way that Joseph did with his brothers, and the way that Dale did. And I would just pray that God will move on your heart that way. So we're just going to take a few minutes in quiet. And if that connects with you, I would just invite you to leave your seat, come walk up to the cross. You can drop the stone in the little basket. Grab a card if you want. And And I'll wait a few more minutes and then we'll close in prayer.